Welcome back to the Federal Way Black Collective's weekly live stream show, Thursday Thoughts. Information is power, and we, the Federal Way Black Collective, consider ourselves a powerful vehicle of providing factual and relevant information to the public. We keep you up to date with education, youth, city policy, and politics, as well as current and relevant events that happen daily. We are made up of Lynn, myself, political strategist extraordinaire, Lamont, community advocate and owner of Lifestyles Barber Academy, James, the silent assassin, and of course, Drew, our favorite producer, is home due to COVID-19, since we now all shoot from home. We are sponsored by Rugged Genius, EvanCook.com, Pretty Grind Entertainment, Positive Vibes, located at the Commons Mall, as well as Positive Vibes 1111.com. How are you all doing this evening?
Doing great, thanks.
I'm really excited. Tonight we have a couple of great guests. I want to start with our first timer, Ms. Christina Laster. Do you want to take a second to introduce yourself to our audience so they know who you are, what your background is?
So my name is Christina Laster. I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much. I am an education, civil rights activist and humanitarian. I've spent a lot of time, doing community organizing, also supporting Black parents pursue their children's best education possible. I was the previous education chair for the NAACP in Southwest Riverside County. Also worked for the California Policy Center as their community organizer. I am now National Parents Union delegate and advisor. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And how about you, Dr. Tammy Campbell?
Hello, everybody. Tammy Campbell, Superintendent, Federal Way Public Schools. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Mr. Reichtdale?
Hey, thanks for having me back. I'm Chris Reichtdale, Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Washington, basically Superintendent of Public Schools. Good to see you all.
You too, sir.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on this evening. I know you guys are hard at work during the day, so we appreciate you guys for making the time. I think so many people are interested in like the state of education these days, what's going on, and our focus is so shifted, right? Like, even though we're not commuting every day to work, our days are still very filled with Zoom calls and everything else. There's so many expectations of where to be. And right now, all over the country, especially I'm concerned, and I know our community watching is concerned about reopening. What does it look like? We hear all these narratives in the media. We have, hear all these plans and these documents on social media, and that's kind of where a lot of people get their information. So that's why this is where we hold and host this conversation. But what does that look like for you guys? I think first I want to kind of take a step back, like just for our audience members that maybe are just tuning in, what do those roles look like? So what is the state superintendent role? What is the Federal Way Public School District role? And as a national delegate, like what kind of things do you guys do? Whoever wants to start first.
Chris, you want to start?
Sure, really big picture. Thank you. From the state perspective here, what we try to do is partner with our folks at Department of Health and the governor's office to create a framework. So what does it mean for a school district to decide when it's healthy enough to open? And the governor has issued that. High, medium, and low risk counties is how he's defined that. It's all about how many cases you have over the last 14 days per 100,000 of population. So most of the Puget Sound is at high or medium, not really safe to open to in-person learning right now. He's left that primarily up to local school districts, but with that framework in mind. And the other thing that we do, of course, is try to support our school districts, make sure they have resources. So whatever opening model they choose and however they balance that delicate nature between keeping students and staff healthy and safe, but also trying to build out a more robust remote learning model, our job is to try to ensure that they keep getting the resources they need to provide direct instruction, teaching and learning, as well as supports for families. And last year when it shut down so fast, it was so new to everybody that there was a lot of fragmentation. There were districts doing a lot of different things. This time around, our districts have a significantly better framework in place. Daily schedules, weekly schedules, attendance, evaluating student learning, family engagement. They've deployed tens of thousands of devices and connections. And so I think what we're trying to balance here now is trying to make the best of the situation. But again, as you've heard me say in the past with you all, there's no substitute for the supports that we build in our schools in person. So this is still a disproportionately impactful model. It is still impacting students with disabilities more. Many families and communities of color, English language learners struggle more without those supports. And so we know this isn't our best effort with respect to what could happen in person, but balancing public health is really where it's at from our perspective, and making sure our districts are supported with the decisions that they make.
Definitely. That's an amazing perspective to start from. What do you think, Dr. Campbell? What is your role kind of in this conversation? Because I know we've kind of talked about it before in the past.
Absolutely. So I think Chris has really summarized sort of the framework under which individual districts are operating. There are 295 school districts in the state, and Federal Way is one of them. One of the things we did, we pulled together our regional superintendents because we realized if I make a decision, it has huge impact. So it was Seattle, Highline, Renton, all of us met with the Department of Health to get a sense of what the infection rates were. I want to say this happened in mid-July, and based on those numbers, we knew we weren't going to be able to open up safely. We had already surveyed our families. We had a committee of 100 people. We were getting ready to do this hybrid where we were going to have half of our scholars come on 2 days a week and the other half come 2 days, but the infection rates are so high. And we know that when infection rates are high outside of your schools, that only leads to trouble once scholars come back into the school setting. So now we're framed up and ready to do our full remote. And we just on Friday rolled out what we call a guidebook for our staff, articulating what it's going to look like, and a family guidebook that tells them. So for example, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, live instruction. And we've laid it out for every level. On Wednesday, small group work. And across our secondaries, we'll have a set time where we do college and career ready. It'll be just like they are in school. I will say, I agree with Chris that we've had to select of the list of non-ideal options. This is the best one because the most ideal is face-to-face. But
Right.
we've done a lot of work. We listened to parents. We probably had about 15 parent forums in all kinds of ways. And the big thing they kept telling us, we want consistency. We don't want to have to figure out each individual teacher's way of doing this. So we've taken our LMS and standardized what all parents will see when they go online. We've purchased school supplies for scholars, so they don't have to do that this year. So anyone who's free and reduced will get free supplies. Any person who is not free and reduced, the most they'll pay $20. We know on average that was costing $100. We've worked with Right at School to get low, what we would call affordable childcare for families. We'll have that across the district. And right now what's happening, all of our principals are doing parent Zooms. And what I've asked them to do is twice a month to do these Zoom meetings, because that's a way for them to take a temperature check on the commitments we've made in our guidebook and what we've said will happen in terms of instruction, that the parents are giving them back real time to let them know how it's going. In addition to that, simultaneously, we're working on our social, what I would say, social emotional learning, making sure our teachers are attending to how students feel. How are they coming to this space after being out of school for so long? And the third prong of this is the work we're doing about being an anti-racist organization. Our whole administration are reading a book by Ibram Kendi called How to Be Anti-Racist. They're taking that reading back to their staff, because we understand that there's also an urgency of now around how are we going to be equitable, and how are we going to, at a time where online learning has exposed these gaping inequities, how do we ensure our staff are ready to close those gaps? And one of the things I did, I listened to a group of scholars about 3 weeks ago. They wanted a meeting with me. They wanted to tell me how I could, they said, Dr. Campbell, we've got some ideas how we can make Federal Way even more equitable and how we can help combat racism. And they gave me a list of 4 or 5 things. And they're part of a group called SOAR, Students Organized Against Racism. And we have groups like this at all of our secondary schools. So in about another month, we're going to have a summit with all of them. They're going to talk to us about what they think we should do. And then they're going to share that at a board meeting. And we're going to take their recommendations, and that will drive the first 2 or 3 things that we try to tackle this year. And we believe we can do those things while we're in this context of remote. It was one of the most powerful listening sessions I've had in a long time. And what was powerful about it is to see the students. You had African-American students, white students, and to hear this young white boy talk about how he had seen his friends of color get disciplined in a way that he didn't think was fair was so powerful. And so I believe that those kinds of things, coupled with rigorous online learning and parent and community engagement, I think that we're going to make the most of what I would call a less than ideal situation, which is remote learning.
Oh, that's going to be amazing to see come through. I know in the past week or so, they had a graphic release with information about like the Right to School program, and a lot of parents seem to be under the impression that that is still a before and after school program with increased cost. And I believe from what I was reading, that's a little different. Do you mind explaining that a little bit?
It's a childcare. It's during the day. And one of the things that we haven't rolled out yet, we're still negotiating with them some discounted rates. In addition to that, so there will be discounts for families who are on free and reduced lunch. And although this hasn't been publicly announced, I'm looking at a way for the district to subsidize it in a way to lower the cost just a little bit more. So those 2 things, we'll hear more about that next week. Then the other thing that we're doing for scholars who may be in what we call really dire situations in families, we'll take on a case-by-case basis to see if we can do even deeper discounts. We cannot do it carte blanche because we're also at a situation where, the decreased revenue that's coming through the state. And we are probably looking at in the spring, we're anticipating there may be budget cuts. So, and I'm sure Chris could probably add a little bit more to that. But even with all of that, we're taking our resources right now and giving as much support to our families as possible. The other thing that we're doing 20 to 30 minute parent courses on how to support their scholars. So we're doing that in a couple of weeks to get them ready. We're having a district-wide orientation for families on how to start the school off right. And we have a parent group who's vetted those materials. And then I want to say that first week in September, 3 days where scholars are going to come and pick up their school supplies, come to the schools and pick up the supplies that we purchased. Also for them to get other materials that will be important for them, their laptops. I want to thank OSPI. They will be providing some Wi-Fi access for those families who qualify for free and reduced lunch. Chris, I think that's going to be a big gap closer for us as well, because Wi-Fi is one of the big ones. We've ordered 5,000 more laptops in addition to the ones that we deployed. We anticipate we may be deploying anywhere between 7,000 to 8,000 laptops. So with the Wi-Fi support that we get from OSPI, our goal is to have every family to have hardware. The other thing that we did, we took our elementary schedule and we divided the students in half. So half are in an AM session, half in a PM. So if I'm a parent who has a child who has to share a computer, you can choose AM or PM. So your middle or high school student who may need that laptop can do it. So we're trying to do creative things like that to ensure access. And then the last thing that we're doing, we're videotaping every lesson so that at the end of the day, if I'm a parent and I can't come to, and I'm working all day, the lesson is videotaped so they can see it. That way we're closing as many gaps as possible so that they will be videotaped for a parent to have access.
Wow, Let's see here. I know that you have to get back to another meeting, so I want to just give you another 5 minutes, Dr. Campbell. Was there anything that we didn't cover or that you wanted to maybe discuss and see that what the community can do to support the district at this
Well,
time? Or
I would just say if you're a parent or a community member, find out when your school Zoom is. And the reason we believe that's a way for folks to access their principal is that we're providing the laptops, we're providing Wi-Fi, but that's an important accountability structure for families to tell us, to hold us accountable to be doing what we say that we're doing. The other thing is we have a program called Parent View where all of our parents can go and check on progress. 4 years ago when I came, we were averaging about 30% of our families signed up for that. Now we're at about 95%, which means they can check real time on their scholars' progress. So I just want to encourage them to do that. And if they can't, if that doesn't work, just email us. We have a 24-hour response time expectation. We'll get back to any and everybody. This won't be easy. We don't have all the answers. There's a lot of things that have to sort of be worked out, and I'm just appreciating our parents being patient with us. But I just want them to know what they experienced in the spring is not going to be what they experience now. It's going to be, we're taking attendance, scholars are getting graded for this. And so there is a level of expectation for our scholars that I just want parents to know that we're committed to giving them the maximum support in this online setting. And we're constantly monitoring infection rates because what was so helpful is to get the decision tree that the governor rolled out in conjunction and partnership with the Department of Health, and I'm assuming OSPI. That guideline will now determine when we can shift to a hybrid model in the coming months. And so we'll be continuing to watch those rates so that we can see what might be next for us in terms of shifting to a hybrid if it is possible, if the virus allows us to.
that would be good to find out. I did have a couple audience questions here before we let you go. So great teamwork on the reentry plan. When are you going to start holding your white administrators accountable for excessive discipline? And will the public comments be open at school board meetings?
So great question about discipline. So, one of the things that we're doing, you've heard me talk about, we have been a district, we've got our racial equity policy. We've been doing work on culturally competent practices. We're doing readings and learning. It's not like a light switch where you can say tomorrow, this is how everyone will behave. I believe culture takes time to make those transitions. But last year, in the spring, what I had done was asked all of our administrators to have a goal around eliminating disproportionality in discipline for our African American and our Latino students. And that was a goal that each of them had. And they come to principal meetings with a case study of a student that they were working with and focusing on. And we'll continue that work. And right now, the way we handle public comment at a board meeting, what folks are doing is just simply emailing those into us. We're sharing that with the board, and that's the way we've been handling those. And we've had them and we'll continue to be responsive. They can also email me directly if they have concerns, and I will be getting back to folks too to answer as many questions as I can.
Thank you so much for that transparency and clarification for the communication for your office. I think that's going to be amazing for parents moving forward. Just one last question. What is FWPS's response to BLM's demand for getting SROs out of schools?
Yeah. And I know I anticipated that. We've heard a lot about that. So here's what I would say. I don't want to respond to be a reactionary anything and just say, because people want SROs out of the buildings, we do. Well, right now they're not there because there are no students there. So we're not under contract with them because we are currently not in an online environment. But here's my spiel on this. About 2 years ago, there was an incident that happened at Todd Beamer with an SRO and a student. I immediately met with the chief of police. As a result of that, we had that particular officer replaced with someone who I felt was student friendly. This is a complex issue. And I believe there is a place in schools for properly trained, culturally responsive SROs. One of the things that's happened is that OSPI has some required trainings that our SROs participate in. All of the SROs in our district, and a lot of it is around relationship building, de-escalation. They have participated in that. We have an agreement that we have collaboratively worked on with the Chief of Police of Federal Way. And in it, we talk about how they are to interact with scholars. If you see our SROs, they go to the kids' games and they do training with our safety officers. And so for me, it's about making sure the principals are not deferring discipline to SROs. The principals should be managing that and not criminalizing student behavior. And that's the work we're doing internally around positive behavior support and restorative justice. But there are times if someone comes to our school with a weapon or something, heaven forbid something happens and we don't have someone there, this thing could flip very quickly. And all of a sudden now I'm trying to explain why we don't have our schools protected from some things that could be really dangerous. And so to me, it's about getting the SROs who are culturally responsive, who love young people, who can mentor them. And that's what we have in our agreement. Those are the things that we talk about and work on with our SROs, and having our principals not relegating discipline to SROs. That's inappropriate. Our staff should be managing that. And that's how we're approaching that particular issue. But it's not as simple as eliminating school resource officers. And from my perspective, it's not. It's just making sure they are culturally responsive and they're doing their work in a way that lets students feel like it's relational and not criminal. And I think that's what we're pressing.
Thank you so much for answering that. I think that that's a tough question to be hit with on the spot. I mean, these come from Facebook. So I, first off, just want to thank you guys for being willing.
And Lynn, I want to just say, I want to say this as a mom who has a Black son. And we were at Hoop Fest, and I'll never forget this. He was in middle school, and he said to me, we were standing at a game at Hoop Fest in Spokane, and I saw him sort of stepping behind me. And I said, "What's up?" And he looked across the street and there was a police officer. He says, "Mom, I get a queasy feeling in my stomach when I see the police." And I was like, "Why? What is that about?" And he later told me that they look at him funny. And I remember feeling so like, what the world? This is an honor student. He has not had any problems. How could he have picked this up? And his dad is a police officer. So here, this was my own child's experience. I offer that up to say, I'm not saying this absent. My thinking about this is not sort of naive or assimilating or denying. I do believe that there's a way for us to have a school resource officers in our schools, as long as we're fierce in making sure they're getting trained and they're behaving appropriately. There are times when you don't want untrained staff dealing with situations. And unfortunately, there are times where we may have weapons in schools and things like that. And the last thing I want is for something to happen on the other side of this, where we're not in a position to provide the safest environment for our young people. So that's kind of my thought on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell, for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. As always, we want to continue this. I appreciate having educators here just about quarterly. So we will definitely be inviting you back in the future. I wish you could stay to join us for the whole episode, but I appreciate your time this evening.
I'm going to stay 10 more minutes. My team just texted me 10 more minutes. So I don't have to talk. I'm going to listen.
No worries. I know that, Christina, you haven't had much time, and I see that you've joined us, Mr. Heron. Let me give you a chance to introduce yourself for the evening. How are you?
You talking to me? Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'm Al Heron. I am a founder of STEMTech Foundation. I'm on the board with the Black Education Strategies Roundtable. I've served with the Equity and Education Committee, African American Commission, the Breakfast Group. I'm a physicist and electrical engineer by training, but I'm an entrepreneur by inclination. I've worked up and down the I-5 corridor now in STEM and career education. for probably the last 10 years. I did quite a bit of work in recent years with Federal Way, a school district. I had the privilege of meeting and working with Dr. Campbell, and I'm very well motivated even before the pandemic to address remote learning needs. And this is an unfortunate silver lining of this pandemic, in that where we used to really think, how can we disrupt the system so that we can get more teachers of color in front of more students of color? Well, guess what? Now one person can see 10 times as many students, and those students can see them. So this is an opportunity. We should take advantage of it.
All right. Well, I mean, that seems like a good starting place. What do you think are the most pressing things? I feel like laptops is just a gateway. And I see a lot of profound state support for getting laptops in the hand of every student, right? But what's next? Like, they can have all the laptops in the world. I appreciate what Dr. Campbell said with respect to the programs that are being developed and that are already in the works in regards to like mental health supports. But what do you guys think are missing? What are we missing that we could still improve upon?
Well, if I'm going to get another chance to talk, I'd love to answer that. And what I can tell you is that most recently, Engageable Designs, Akeen Alston and myself joined forces, and we're doing work in Tacoma and Seattle, specifically for some pilot programs. Oh, let me not forget Highline School District. And I'll use the Highline School District virtual summer program that we did. And we did 20 kids per school for 3 elementary schools. And we were working on how can we make this truly work. So certainly we did the prep work. We tried to make sure that all the parents had access to being online. And then we went a step further than that. And we actually masked up and gloved up and sent out a person that we call engagement specialist. And the purpose of that engagement specialist was to go out and help a parent fix issues that they were having with online access for their kid, or if they simply did not have access at all, working with the proper authorities to make sure they got access, so that we can actually have that summer school and have it come off well. Now, this engagement specialist also in the future, we see doubling as a real-time mentor, because what we have discovered, what I have discovered in my work, but let alone the collaborative work that I've been doing, is that our students of color, especially African-American males, you just can't take the if you build it, they will come. So you might have some online activity like Khan Academy or something, and say, well, they've got Khan Academy, just have them sign up. Okay, well, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Okay, in the real world, pre-pandemic, what would happen is that you'd have the opportunity to have a mentor work with that young student and teach them the good and the usefulness of accessing that online program. Talk with them about it personally, one-on-one. But we could do that same thing even in this online necessity, both virtually and through this engagement specialist approach. So that's just a sampling of some of the things that we've been working on to try and address some of the needs and requirements.
What do you think, Christina? What do you think about that list? What are the things you're working on?
So basically, I want to come from a place of bringing in the true and authentic parent voice. A lot of times people say, well, we're talking to parents, but is that the authentic parent voice? And are you really hearing from the community in the trenches and on the ground level, or have you monopolized on a group of parents that you prefer to listen to? I am working with parents in all gamuts of life, that are experiencing multi-levels of issues. Now, when we look at what's currently taking place, it's easy to say it happened because of this current pandemic crisis. But what we know is that the deficits and yawning and persistent gaps that we see were already in existence. We're now seeing them clearer, right? And parents are understanding that they need to debunk some of the myths and rhetorics that were surrounding parent involvement. What was parent involvement looking like? Who has the metric on parent involvement? How can you say to what degree a parent is involved or not involved? What does that look like for different households? And so we hear this terminology around looking at the whole child, but what I'm looking at is the whole family, right? What is their family dynamic? How are they able to access high quality education? You don't get a redo for K-12. And so when you're thinking about urgency, that it means yesterday, right? We don't have the opportunity or time to waste, and our kids can't wait. I mean, so bringing the true authentic voice in to talk to decision makers, to talk to those who are in charge of the funding, to talk to people that are making policies that they believe might not have consequences, but they do. And some of them they know may have the consequences, but they do a ends justifies the means type of equation and just go with it, right? And so putting power back in the hands of actual parents to be able to utilize their voices in an authentic way and have a seat at the table is what I work on every day, and what we do at the National Parents Union, and what I just have done for years. However, what does that look like, right? When we look at in the state of California, where I'm at currently, you see 80% of Black kids can't do math at grade level. That's staggering, right? You call that an achievement gap. I call that an access and opportunity gap. You see 68% of Black kids can't read or write at grade level, okay? And then when you look at the national averages, you'll find that Black children have not progressed since the year 2000. Well, that ought to be criminal, okay? And so I'm not just looking at ways to give a minimal education. I'm looking at how are we graduating our students into society as contributing members of society that have a future and a hope, not just something that's the basic minimum. How are we listening to parent voices? How are we as parents having a seat at the table when things are coming out and decisions are made about our children? What does that look like, right? And so basically, when we look at it nationally, we look at what is the constitutional right to an education? How are states being held accountable for those measurable outcomes to a high quality education? And how can we really, as parents, push for a right, a constitutional right and guarantee to a high quality, equitable education, looking at ways that parents can hold systems and educators accountable? And what I say about equity is this: if the teachers are supposed to be molders of children's dreams, and they're there as gatekeepers and hindrances of that, then maybe they need to pick another field, right? This requires a heart change. This requires a right now solution. And I understand that people say we're working on it. Well, you do not have to work on whether you want to teach this child or not, and whether you want to set the bar to a standard of excellence to teach the child, and that every student that comes into your environment, you ought to look at as, I am going to provide them with the best education possible. I'm not going to look at them from a place of bias. I'm not going to set low expectations. I'm going to set high expectations for each and every child that I choose to educate. What we have seen historically and cyclically is that that has not happened. Groups have been granted preferential treatment, which is a form of discrimination. And so me as a education civil rights activist, I really challenge those types of things, challenging that systemic cyclical pattern of behavior that continues to allow for the gaps to be yawning and persistent. Our kids cannot wait. And so coming from a sense of urgency and actually teaching parents, you know, how to utilize their authentic voices is what, you know, I'm working on.
All righty. Well, I love the fact that you're able to give us that national perspective as well, because everyone else is local and there's so much happening so fast right now, right? I'm not even sure where to go with that one. What do you think, Chris? What are you working on right now? What fits in? What are your needs from the community?
Yeah, so I think what's so powerful is if I can kind of link together a bit of what Al said and Christina said about systems that approach things with, we're all going to do something similar, or we're going to have a consistent approach, or everyone's going to have access to it. Those broad statements about sort of open door systems. And if you come find us and you get access to us, then boy, it's going to be amazing because everything's here. And I think what you heard from Al from a STEM perspective and a regional perspective and a community perspective, and then Christina with a very, very intentional focus on understanding the systemic racism that has permeated public education and lots of systems, is you got to go beyond just the doors are open and boy, is it more accessible than it's ever been, to what are we intentionally doing to think differently about practices. So the question came up earlier for Tammy about discipline, for example. It's not enough to say, hey, we need to create a system of equal around discipline. What we saw for so long was that systems of discipline were intentionally biased against young Black males, particularly because they were not culturally responsive. They did not respect and understand family units, the way boys interact in general, the way our young men interact. And so it also came in conflict with who's in front of them. 3/4 of our teaching staff are white females. And so there's a difference there. There's just a fundamental difference there that requires professional learning and professional training. So I think about what we've done in our state to try to dismantle the systemic racism of discipline by totally wiping out the rules after 40 years. We've rewritten it to get rid of long-term suspensions. That is the prison to pipeline, school to prison pipeline that begins as early as kindergarten in our system. From small, tiny exclusions, small disruption, you're out of the classroom. And 2 days later, another disruption, you're out of the classroom. And it seems so innocuous, but when you do that persistently over time, you are targeting students in one way, you're excluding them from learning. And what we found out in our state, for example, is we were never calling parents. We were saying, hey, as long as it's not a long-term suspension and something serious, we can handle this in the classroom. So that persistent everyday impact on kids was going without parent engagement. So when Christina talks about authentic parent engagement and intentional practices, it means we got to be a lot more honest about systems that have been in place to create a tremendous bias. Technology is another one. It's not about, hey, everyone, if you can find us, we have technology. Going into communities, having parent and community engagement and saying, who doesn't have not just access to hardware, but who doesn't have access to reliable connectivity? And I think, as Al pointed out, that's not a new thing with COVID. Now there's a spotlight on it because now it's really the only option in many communities. But when you think about where we were a year ago and the disadvantage of a family who didn't have connectivity, how do they get to their high school and beyond plan, which we've all said is this powerful tool for advancing students? How do they know about courses that are coming up if they want to be in an acceleration policy and they're thinking about advanced coursework? How do they get their parents to connect to school? How do they meet in small groups with their peers? How do they submit assignments, which is increasingly the expectation of teachers without digital platforms and connectivity? So we've had systems of racism exist long before COVID. We've just now put a giant spotlight on it. So I really appreciate this conversation because it's as Tammy said, it's not like you can flip a switch, but there are moments in our history where it is so much in everyone's face that if you deny it now, you're not just, ignorant of it. You are contributing to racist systems. And I think that's what, some of the literature that's really emerging for folks now is you don't get the choice to be in the middle anymore. It's not, hey, I'm not racist. If you're not actively dismantling it, if you're not anti-racist, taking on discipline policies, access policies, acceleration policies, language policies, giving students the opportunity to learn dual language at an early age because it's a powerful force for employment. But if you wait and make that a high school thing just to get into college or university, and students have already faced 10 years of discrimination, then our African-American students and many others are much less likely to take a second language. Those systems of racist oppression exist when we don't put a spotlight on them. So this has been the greatest moment, in my opinion, in 20 years that I've been in education. It's the hardest. It is full of frustration and pain, and it should be. But I'm really excited because it's brought people, and a lot of people of privilege like myself, to a conversation that has been happening for a very long time. But we have a responsibility as allies and people with privilege and power to now say it's not enough to just create equal. We've got to create equity, which means disproportionately moving systems and money where it needs to go. So it's been pretty amazing. And I know we've got a long journey here to go. It's nothing we fix overnight or a year or 5 years. But man, if we blow this opportunity to disrupt systems now, it's explicit racism, and no one can hide from that. So I'm really glad to be on this with Al and Christine, and just the perspectives they bring, and let's keep it going here.
You know, one thing that's really interesting about, like, when we're talking about connectivity access, recently I moved, and so when I moved to a new complex, very close to my old complex, just as nice, everything's fine, right? But the infrastructure of my apartment complex, I don't have good internet service. And I'm just like, in 2020, this is crazy. Like, I had to get a house phone because my calls keep dropping. But like, what is that? Like, I have a 2-year-old, but a lot of the children that you guys are advocating for are in elementary school. They're in kindergarten. What do you do? Because I can tell you as a single mom, if my child needed to get on to converse with their teacher, but I need to log on to do my job from 8 to 5, that rent and that my work is going to take precedent. And I guess more of the issue is, even if you do have a stable job, right, and you can buy that laptop, that tablet that they need to access, if the infrastructure in our complexes aren't prepared, like, literally, I'm not really sure what those answers look like for families. Because you can even get pod teachers, you can hire whoever you want, but if that infrastructure isn't there, how are we expecting them to all be able to maintain and do those, follow those live instruction videos? I don't know, like, when some of my staff asked me some questions, and I was like, I don't know, they might have to do drive-ins like at the library. Is there Wi-Fi access in the parking lot at the library? Like, what does that really look like real time? Because we can have a lot of conversations, we can have a lot of listening sessions, but the reality is they will all be virtual. How will these families that don't currently have access attend that conversation?
Well, you know, going to your point that you mentioned, this is something that was also brought up, is the fact that it's not so much families also having access, but what about the kids themselves don't want to learn? Because you can present somebody with all the opportunities, but then maybe they have no interest in the virtual learning. So what are you going to do as an educator or even as a parent? What are the steps or what are the motivation skills that you're going to present to them to say, well, for at least the next 6 months, these are the options that you have. You don't have anything else. You're not going to be able to conglomerate with the rest of your peers. You know, you're not going to be in the large buildings or schools. You're not going to be having, you know, the information in front of you presented from an actual individual. It's going to be real time, but do most of them really want to sit in front of a computer or laptop, you know, for several hours a day and try to learn? I mean, something new for some of them. So these are things that also have to be considered, you know, when we're trying to balance it into, you know, to the new way that education has become since this virus situation. So are there alternatives, or maybe are there ways that all the three of you might think that you can kind of at least bring some form of engagement from the kids to have excitement about trying to do it? Because more than likely in the first couple of weeks, you can kind of gauge the excitement factor, you know, whether they're going to be interested. I mean, this might even go down to the ones that are younger. The ones that are older, they might take that option a little bit differently. But the ones that are younger, they don't understand, they might just lose interest. They might say, okay, why am I doing this? You know, after a couple of weeks, you know, all of a sudden they're bored. They want to go outside. They want to do something. So how do you tell them that they're not going to be able to participate? They're not going to be able to do those things that they did the previous school year? And this is what they have to do now, follow these protocols, at least for the next 6 months.
So, you know, I just want to triangulate in something about the word equity. And, you know, we hear that thrown out a lot about how people are working on equity, and we're not talking about fairness. We're talking about educational justice. Okay. And so let's talk about that word equity, giving each person what he or she needs. And when we're talking about children, that is educating them according to what they need. IEPs do that. I think all kids should have an individualized education plan, you know, but that's not here or there for today. However, we're looking at what is it that every child needs to thrive, and can that really be done from a systemic approach, or does that work need to be contracted out in some ways, right? What is that going to look like so that every child has what he or she needs. There is an internet deficit, whatever you want to call it, gap that is persistent. I have three things: a mobile hotspot, 5 Mbps of internet, 500, I'm sorry, and a router extender device. And guess what? When, sometimes that even fails, right? And so there are families in marginalized communities that don't have what they need. And when you're looking at the words equity, they sound highly aromatic and deodorized, but we really need to break that down. Are the children in the learning environment getting what they need to thrive? Is each child supported by their modality of learning? James, I heard you say some kids might not even, want to log on. Well, that's not their modality of learning, to sit behind a computer screen all day. You could have one child that may do well with that, but you have another child that is really a kinesthetic learner. What is being provided to that kinesthetic learner so that they have what they need to thrive? And so looking at ways to reframe the narrative and the thought process around equitable education is really a step in the right direction.
Yes, Christina, I need to jump right on that because I really do believe you hit the nail on the head, and James certainly set that up properly. I spent probably since 2007 helping my wife build a psychology private practice. So for that reason, also because both my sons were needed participants in an IEP. I've gotten to know that process, that approach very well. And for the last 5 years, I've been advocating the IEP approach for students of color, just because. And if we were to actually take that seriously and apply the IEP methodology to students of color, and then we would address some of the issues that you just raised, Christina, and it also would be necessity being the mother of invention, help us figure out ways to engage students who are kinesthetic learners, who are, get the heck away from me technology, because they're out there, okay? Just because you're a kid doesn't mean that you really love all technology. And they do really need to get out on a playground and blow off some steam. And I mentioned this before, but that's part of what we have in mind for the engagement specialist. That engagement specialist can be a mentor, can be a technical, a mobile, on the road individual who solves technical issues, can address issues for parents and families who have language barrier issues and need additional help to solve problems. So we really do need to take these things that we say as possibilities and turn them into reality. And now is the time. And as Chris was saying, we cannot blow this opportunity. This kind of conversation that we're having right here today, which is not something I knew was going to happen until James reached out to me and said, Al, can you participate? These are prime opportunities to have this discussion and actually generate real and tangible solutions. So I really hope that that's what comes out of this meeting today, is a push and a drive to go after real and tangible solutions to the very problems that you've raised.
Interestingly enough, one of the comments from the audience was like, I want to hear more data and facts pertaining to our Black scholars within Federal Way Public Schools. I don't feel that the true issues have been identified at the state or district level. There needs to be an unbiased reporting firm hired to specifically conduct a root cause analysis in order to better serve our students. I like that comment, and I think that's an interesting perspective, but I think that we also have to be really cognizant of what we're dealing with our budget. So hiring a firm to do that data, I'm not really sure that that's really going to be a possibility, or that it's really fiscally responsible, right? One thing I enjoy seeing from the Seattle Foundation and a lot of statewide coalitions is that they're investing in families to provide that data and to, be the ones to bring that information and it not have to go through so many other channels. When I started to learn, I think the Black Collective is a new organization. Al, you can probably attest here, like locally. When you start getting into contracts, that is like such a heavy thing. It's like, it takes so much money to sit down and even have that conversation. So I would love just to have families like really start to figure out ways they can engage with organizations like the Black Collective to share their thoughts so that we can compile that and just share it versus putting the burden on them to find the money to hire someone to do that, and to like outreach. We will figure out better ways to communicate. We have a website that allows you guys to input that information. What are your thoughts, Al? You've worked in this community for a long time. You kind of know how that works. Like systemically, is that possible for this school year?
Okay, well, I do want to make the point that the Black Collective of Pierce County has been around for about 60 years. Okay.
Yes, they have. And they are great partners of ours. We are not stealing their thunder at all.
I just found out recently because of James that you were doing it in Federal Way, and I encourage that. I support that. I'm very happy about that. I understand your point about budget restrictions and being fiscally responsible, but this is my personal opinion. And based on my experience and my observations, but there are things that are a big, strong, important part of a school district's budget that where those things aren't able to be done now, and budget categories can be shifted to other categories. In addition to that, there are independent ways of getting those numbers that don't involve hiring an outside third-party firm, in that CBOs that have been in the trenches from day one, that are not the school district, can be hired to do that kind of research. And there are historical examples of that being done. So that is very affordable, would be very applicable to what you're suggesting. And it's also a now kind of thing. I'm very passionate about that. Okay,
no, I agree.
CBOs are the backbone of community service in the areas that we're discussing, and they have been marginalized to a certain degree for the last few years, and that needs to change. And in fact, I don't think we have any other option, but in fact, it's changing before our eyes.
Yeah, because I'm not sure how else to like access people so quickly, right? Because the community-based organizations, they're right there out now in our communities giving produce boxes, right? They're the only ones that actually put eyes on families in this pandemic because the way we're limited in gathering. So as far as like quick action, finding solutions, hearing from families, I think that's going to be the quickest kind of way to get that. But I agree, we also have to do things simultaneously, right? So we also have to get ramped up for the legislative session. What we gather in the next few weeks to support the school district's reopening is going to be very different from what we need to have prepared and gathered for January. Legislative session is a whole different ballgame.
Well, the good news, some of the good news is that some of what we're talking about, the levers of power are actually paying attention to. Just as an example, I think I'm a member of 4 different groups. At least 2 of them are family engagement focused, and I've been meeting for weeks with others. I think there was a question raised about general internet access and problems that are faced by families. There is an internet access crisis team that I'm a part of, and these people are not messing around. We can talk about the crisis and issues of people of color, of African Americans in particular, and English second language families. And these people are going after this. They are putting in new fiber. They are, getting the funding to expand internet access across the board. I'm not saying they've solved the problem. I'm saying they're going after it. And I didn't realize how much it would impact me for Christina, my friend, to say this, because I know I've heard her say it multiple times, but equity, it not being this word equity, now I have a problem with it. It's about educational justice, what our students have a right to. So she and I are going to have more conversations about that, because that is very well put, and we need to pay attention to it right now.
Do you mind expanding on that, Christina, just for our audience?
So,
Anything else?
one aspect of educational justice I want to talk about is the fiscal impact that's always brought up. We don't have the budget, we don't have the funding. Well, if we as parents have to continue to wait for systems to solve their fiscal insolvency problems, then we're going to continue to wait. What we're talking about is educating our children now. The children that you get average daily attending funds for should be adequately educated. There shouldn't be any excuses about why that can't be done. And if that is looked at from a fiscal impact, then I would call it fiscal negligence or fiduciary negligence to have funding to educate children and not. There should be no reason why 11th and 12th graders are reading at a second or third grade level and graduating that way, right? And so we have to really be intentional and pushing as parents, as grandparents, what is happening with the funding that the daily attending students receive. We know that compulsory attendance makes it mandatory for all students K through 12 to attend a standards-based educational environment, whether that be a public school, whether a traditional school, private school, charter school, homeschool, whatever that may be. But with the traditional public school, you are receiving funding for each child that is enrolled into your school. Therefore, what is your fiduciary responsibility? What is your fiscal responsibility? And don't cut the kids. Maybe the personnel should be cut. I'm just saying, look in other areas that does not take away from the kids. And so we really need to be looking at what is the fiscal responsibility and accountability to have measurable outcomes? What are those measurable outcomes going to look like? What is going to happen with regards to parents having a role in that decision-making process with the budget? What goals are going to be set? How long is that timetable going to look to accomplish them, and without excuses and unapologetically? And so when I talk about education justice, looking at that from the fiscal standpoint is one of those things. And we can open that up for more conversation.
Who wants to jump in and tackle that one? I don't want to monopolize everything.
Hopefully, Mr. Superintendent Rydell can actually jump into that one.
Yeah, I definitely want to make sure everyone knows in the state of Washington, we've got a report card that we think is pretty good relative to the rest of the country. Always needs work, but I'd encourage you to go to our OSPI website, because you can go to any school district in the state. You can go to any individual school in the state. You can drill down to the data to see student achievement performance, as Christina's indicated, 4th grade math, 8th grade reading language arts. What we've tried to do is take our whole data systems and turn them inside out, so everyone has the transparency. We are a local control state, of course, so that means as folks really get exposed to that data and begin to ask the hard questions about their school district, they've got to get to a locally elected school board and say, okay, I understand the state's got some problems, and sometimes it's an excuse to talk about resources, but we've increased them dramatically over the last 4 years. So what's happening in my school district and in my building, and why are there differences between buildings in my school district? Is that a leadership issue? Is somebody deploying curriculum differently? Or is there a better emphasis on equity? Are there better supports or parent engagement happening? This is one of those where we've got to question systems and then really ask ourselves, where will I take my leadership and dive into this issue? The resource question is so powerful that Christina brings up, because there are no more excuses about that, quite frankly, especially in a state like ours. It's added $4 billion, $3,500 per child over the last 4 years. You can always use more, but we had problems 4 years ago before we had all that resource. And so the question is, how are we redeploying it differently? Is professional learning just extra days to learn? Or is it going to be intentional about anti-racist practices and bringing culturally responsive practices to gen ed classrooms? Is inclusive practices going to be something that a district emphasizes? It's great to have professional development days, but will every staff member get training on how to bring students with disabilities into the least restrictive environment, a gen ed classroom, and support them? So the resource question that Christina brings up is powerful, because it's not that we can keep saying, well, when we get more, we've got a lot more in this state. And we can deploy it differently, and local districts get tons of flexibility, believe it or not. There's a couple categorical things like transportation and a few other things that are pretty restrictive, but for the most part, they have an enormous amount of flexibility on how to deploy. And now the last thing I'll say about all that is there is always places where we want to get better. So we've now gotten released for about $8 million in purchasing, maybe it's $9 million for those hotspots connectivities for families. We think we can get another 50 to 60,000 families connected with really reliable access. It's federal money we're using, CARES Act money, so it's a transition because at some point that will run out. So I'll be releasing a budget request here in the middle of September that will challenge the legislature over the next couple of years to fully replace that and more, so that we create a permanent expectation in the state of Washington as a right of basic education that every family has connectivity. Again, focusing on educational justice. So putting dollars specifically in families who cannot connect rather than everyone gets $10 a month or everyone gets $100 a year. It's no, we're going to purchase connectivity for the families who cannot access it right now. And then the last thing is I will be issuing a budget request that we pulled together dozens of people in a big giant rewrite of our state's formulas here in the last year and a half. And that's now coming to fruition as a request. Terrible time. We'll have a recession. Everyone will tell us there isn't enough money, but it doesn't mean we don't look past COVID to where we want to be. It will focus on counselors, mental health supports, parent engagement, social workers. It will focus on those professional supports, again, that wrap around the students who need it the most. We got very close last year to adding elementary school counselors in our highest poverty communities. We got it passed for the first time in decades. And unfortunately, it fell by way of the veto pen. But there's some tangible things for communities to go after. Our open data systems to understand their community, the fact that we've got more resources now, the fact that we're adding resources to connect families, and the fact that we're going to build out supports. These are all places where community can really dive in. I was part of a group, Black Education Strategy Roundtable, was brought up earlier by Lynn, I think, around advocacy and legislative work. That group in particular is a force because they're speaking on behalf of the Black community, but they're also in partnership with enormous power players from the private sector, the CBO community, the public sector, to bring pressure on policy results. So for those of you who are part of collectives, that is awesome and it's local. I would encourage you to think about engaging with Black Education Strategy Roundtable or some of the other advocacy groups because they bring a very large presence to Olympia as well.
Definitely. Anything you want to embark upon that, Mr. Herron?
Well, I think that Chris and I need to spend some time together because he said a number of things today, which I agree with. Some things that I would challenge him on, but we seem to be on the same page in terms of going after the opportunities to provide solutions. I will say that about 5 years ago, I was part of a Seattle area African-American roundtable that was sponsored by Governor Inslee. I went into that at the level that I was at with some excitement and trepidation in participating in that kind of event, given the players that walked into the room. So we filled up a basketball, you would call it a kind of a basketball court size area where we put the tables and desks in a big circle. So the center was empty and we talked about issues. And there was with all due respect to everybody, there was a lot of head nodding to things that were being said by people of consequence, including the governor. And one of the things that was discussed was, we've got to get to these students, by third grade. We must do that. And everybody was shaking their head up and down. And it was like being at a rally about, we got to get them by third grade. Well, I waited for my moment and I said, well, I can't say that I agree with that. And you could have heard a pin drop. So I took advantage of that opportunity. I said, it's got to be a pipeline. And the reason for that is, what are you going to tell me? So let's say that we enact something next year because of this conversation. What are we going to tell the fourth grader, who used to be in third grade, that they're out of luck? We can't do anything for them because we didn't catch them by third grade. No, we are going to want a full spectrum pipeline that allows us to address the issues of first, second, third graders and beyond. Kids who have dropped out of a space where we could help them, but come back to that space. So when it comes to resources here, we need a solution pipeline that includes everything from working with students who have issues, that includes their current teachers in professional development, that reaches out and provides professional development for the first and true teachers of this planet, and those are parents, and also that reaches all the way back to university and works with teachers who are just getting their certificate and providing them with professional development on how you access and interact with students of color and their families, how you engage with their families, and go after practical solutions to issues. And one other thing I would say about CBOs in particular is that if you're looking for a way to apply funding in such a way that the medicine, in this case I'm talking about money, that the medicine actually gets to where the pain is, then you really do need to take advantage of CBOs because they already know where the pain is. Okay, they know who's most in pain in a community where someone at a higher level are not going to know. And the districts know who those CBOs are, and they really should be responsible for helping the state have a more formalized relationship with those CBOs. Doesn't mean that every CBO is somehow the solution to everything, but I do know for a fact that there are effective CBOs out there. They simply need to be brought into the fold and access in a way that they can take care of business. And so I just believe strongly in that. I'm happy to answer any questions in that regard.
Very interesting. And recently I've been exploring the term sole source funding. So I wasn't aware of how many departments within the state of Washington have the ability to sole source funding for projects that they believe in. So this idea, sometimes that things have to go through all these committees or need all this review or research. And because I just want to clarify, I'm not saying that I don't think we need to have that research done. I just don't think we need to hire some firm. I think that there are, like Al and Christina have been mentioning, and there are community-based organizations that already do the work that have tons of data in files that they're actually legally required to keep by the county, by the state, because they're already doing work for instance, like locally here in King County, Best Starts for Kids. They're required to keep all that data of the families they talk to that work in 0 to 5, right? So there's other levies on the state, county level we can explore of organizations that have all that data. And thank you to Trinice for mentioning that. She is on the Diversity Commission here in the city of Federal Way. I also do want to highlight another community question. How can we change how crisis funds are dispersed so there is community input and ownership over decision making? Recently, King County Council approved $1 million for digital equity in tech, but the funds are stewarded to Puget Sound Educational District without any community surveying on the most crisis responsive and culturally relevant fiscal sponsors and stewards of pandemic funds. So how can we change, or how could we approach those processes to make sure that that funding that's been diverted reaches the communities that need it the most?
Well, if you're talking about the Puget Sound Education Service District, there is no excuse there. Knowing how to reach CBOs, now knowing who to speak to at school districts, knowing how to access what's truly happening in the community of parents and families, they are expert at that, and don't let them tell you different. So if they have funding to do a certain thing, there should be nothing, and literally nothing, standing in the way of them applying those funds appropriately to get the information that they're missing. And going back to the data issue, most CBOs should and do keep data. Some don't have enough funding to get data, but guess who has the data? The school districts. Why? Because they have to. Okay, if a school district contracts with a CBO or contracts with some third-party education service provider, they keep all the data. And oftentimes it's not well known, but that third-party service, education service provider, that CBO, they have to enter into a data sharing agreement in order to get access to the data that is recorded to show the results of their performance. And so they will be able to tell you where that data is and what school district has it, and over what period of time, and in regard to what particular program that they worked on, even if they themselves don't have the data. So the data is there. We just need to access it. So, sorry, I got to rambling a little bit because this is really a pet peeve of mine. So, happy to talk more about it.
Definitely. Any thoughts you want to share, Mr. Reckdale?
No, only to add that we think maybe by tomorrow, the Office of Financial Management will release another $8 million to us. It is exclusively for community-based organizations through this really difficult time. Again, it's, sort of one-time money. It'll last for a year or so, but we will exclusively send those dollars to community-based organizations through a competitive process. We're going to bifurcate that so some of the big, larger players don't come in. They can often be very sophisticated grant writers. So we will dedicate some of that to very small, very micro, very targeted community organizations, and try to roll that out over the next 4 to 8 weeks here. But stay tuned for that. If you're in the CBO community and you're watching and you say, I've got something to offer for a local school district or a local regional approach, or I'm really close to a particular community, whether it's language access or maybe brokering childcare services for families in need, or supplemental learning, so that when students are trying to figure out how to connect in multiple ways, maybe there's a community center they're going to or a community organization, and maybe that organization just needs connectivity because it's not happening at the family. Lots of possibilities here in the CBO grant process we're about ready to launch here, but stay tuned. We should get the green light tomorrow, and it'll take us a little while to put the grant application in place, and we'll work that through a lot of communities too, so they can get their eyes on that application before it gets out. They'll be able to see it and twist it and say, hey, you really need to think about this in the way that you asked for this. And we will bifurcate that as well.
Well, Chris, let me jump on that real quick. And I don't want to step on the toes of Christina, because I'm sure she has something to add to this. But I'm very glad to have been here for you to say that, because it's important that we keep an eye on that, because one of the things that became an issue a couple of times in the last, 4 years, is that the roadmap project, for example, they had, I think it was the last $1 million that they had in the fund, and they put it out for competitive access. The Federal Way was put together a team to go after it, and they in fact were one of the 4 receivers, awardees of $250,000. And my organization, STEMTAC Foundation, was the STEM provider for that team. So we got to participate in a lot of good work that was done. There's no doubt about that. But I will say that particular opportunity started off with a mandate that the CBOs lead the application, the grant proposal, if you will. And quite literally, halfway through the process, they shifted the rules so that the school district was the one that would call the shots on that. It ended up working out, but it could just as well have not worked out. So if you've got that kind of money coming down the pipe, and if you already recognize that there are going to be larger organizations that can be quite creative, not only in terms of applying for the grants, but quite creative in positioning themselves to be the clear and best choice. Since we're aware of this, then now is the time where we can take steps to make sure that it doesn't happen, that it does not get shifted away from those small CBOs who work the hardest and accomplish quite a bit. Now, I've done pretty well for myself in terms of what funding we've been able to get over the last several years. But I guarantee you that there are hard-working CBOs out there that do great work, who have not been as creative who have not been as fortunate as I have been to be creative enough to get the money anyway, despite the challenges. And those people deserve our support, and so do the families and the communities who can use their work.
Mind if I add on that? I think one of the concerns though that some of those CBOs might even have is they don't know how to have access to those funds like directly. I know in fact, I think everybody here is actually provided the inside of the areas where they can get access to it, especially for this year. But several of them have fallen on the wayside because they don't know how to reach it. So is there maybe something specific that they can do where they can actually continue to do the work, and at the same time, they're able to have the funds to continue to do the work? Because if they don't have that, there's so much, those organizations of impact that they can have within the communities that they serve. I just want you to kind of add on that, and then, I want to see what Ms. Laster can actually input on it as well.
I really do believe that, the people that are in the trenches, grassroots, the actual CBOs, not the ones that are faking to get the funding, that have a lot of funding, should be the ones that actually are having the monies to do the work. They are the community pulse. They know what is happening with the children that they represent. And speaking about funding, I wanted to touch on something really briefly before we end. Looking at longevity and how students are going to be educated, and what is that funding going to look like, and the budgetary processes and hiring processes. How can parents be more involved in that? Are there panels where parents can sit on hiring panels, right? Asking questions, right? Being active participants in who is going to educate their child. How are we able to utilize this time to bring in culturally congruent, ethically matched providers, right? Right now, there's a shift. Things have been disrupted. And so during that process of rebuilding and recreating and innovating, what is the cultural congruence piece going to look like? Are there enough educators that represent the population of students that they serve, right? We could talk a lot about cultural proficiency, but that's not quite cultural congruence with ethnically matched providers. That's a little bit different, right? Someone can say that they're culturally proficient by doing an equity course. Well, how has that worked for the last 10 years, right? And so we're looking at giving the children a model of someone that represents them, someone that they can aspire to be like, and having parents at the table who have a stake and a say in the hiring and retention, right? What is retention going to look like? Because a lot of times when there's a push for more culturally congruent, ethically matched providers or teachers that represent the actual population of students, then what happens is that immediately teachers are hired that represent that population, but they're not retained. And so looking at it from that perspective too, during this time of shift, during this time of innovation, and how flexible and accommodating is the district really going to be on that?
Cool. That's fantastic, Christina. And I did want to grab real quickly on something that James said in regard to how do these CBOs actually, those CBOs that are struggling to understand how they can access these funding, come together in order to be in a position to be around to do some of the things that Christina just talked about. Well, quite simply, the CBOs that are out there can form collaborations and make sure that as a part of those collaborations, there are CBOs that have more experience or have the experience of having been successful at grabbing a proportionate share of those funds. That really is a tangible now kind of solution. So no CBO is an island, and it doesn't have to be. And if they get together with other CBOs, then they are going to be better positioned to lean on people like Chris and find ways to get true and equitable access to funding so that they can serve the community.
Thank you guys so much. This conversation has, I think, definitely been one of my favorites, touching on something in such a high level area, such a fast paced area of society right now. I think that traditionally people felt like, oh, it's the kids, like, oh, they're all going to be fine. But COVID-19 has shown like, no, we need to really prioritize this. And I really love the attention it's drawn, even though it's a really unfortunate situation. So before I go into our announcements and anything, is there any final thoughts you guys want to share with the community?
I just want to say to the parents to continue to push for what your children need. Even, your best effort, just continue to do that. Be intentional, be unrelenting, and be consistent, because your child does not have the opportunity to get a redo on this. And we want to see each generation do better than the last. And so utilize your toolkit, whatever you have, and then help your neighbor. Okay. So after you help your child, go check on your neighbor's child and help your neighbor and find out what they need and how you can also collectively and tribally thrive. And so I just stay inspired.
And that is fantastic. And Christina, you bring something up that gives me an opportunity to say something that I haven't repeated in a while. But how do CBOs begin? They start with 1 or 2 people. So, and how do those 1 or 2 people become larger? Well, they start helping their neighbors. So that's very well put. So that is I want to get behind you and say, me too. I agree with what you just said. That is exactly what needs to be done.
And I just say thanks to everybody for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been nice to come back on. A little bit to build on Christina and Al's point, all things are local. All politics are local, all results are local. Family units and engagement in communities where it's at. So we've got big giant systems and we're constantly trying to reevaluate those systems. But at the end of the day, at least in our state, I can't speak for California or others, we spend virtually every single dollar in the state through a local school board. So as you think about COVID and COVID impacts, and you think about racial equity, and you think about transformational systems work, definitely have an eye on the legislature and the bigger picture, but the real impacts in the local, they're still getting their appropriation for next year. Now they're going to get some CARES Act federal dollars. Now they may be getting access to local CBO dollars. So engage locally, ask the hard questions about what is the reopening plan for our schools? How are you engaging families and students? And run for school boards, please, please, please. I can't overstate that enough. There's, hey, $12.5 billion a year. It goes through 1,477 elected school board members in this state. And every school district has 5 of them. Seattle has 7, but everyone else has 5. These people are on a rotating schedule for elections, and run for school board.
Thank you guys so much. I definitely want to highlight for announcements this week. Starting tomorrow, the Federal Way Black Collective's partnership with Multi-Service Center and Lindsay Foster, our Nothing to Lose But Change event. That is a 3-day virtual event starting tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. So follow our Facebook page. It'll be a live conversation, as well as then on the 22nd, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., a Healing and Grief live stream event. And on Sunday, 9:30 to 12:30, Soul Sunday, along with a backpack drive and giveaway with school supplies. For the weekly wrap up, we definitely had a lot of information coming through. As you know, Councilmember Mark Kopang did step down. His seat is vacant. And so applications to fill that council seat within the city of Federal Way closed on Friday, August 28th. We also have a lot of important things coming up. We're going to be doing a couple program launches. I'm really excited to have you guys see how this unfolds. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and check out our website, which launched a few weeks ago, www.fwblackcollective.com. I'm really excited to announce a partnership with the Kent Chamber of Commerce. So please keep checking out information for that. As it relates to education, we stay in constant contact with Dr. Tammy Campbell. You know, we have communication with Chris Breakdale's office. We're going to continue that. We're going to open the lines of communication more so with Mr. Herron. If you as a community want to reach them, all of their links were dropped in the live. If you have additional questions, you can message us on our Facebook page or our website, and we can connect you with them or anyone who's been a guest of ours. I don't know. I feel like that's it. If there's anything else you guys want to pop in, am I missing an event?
I do want to encourage you to pay attention to the incoming efforts of the Breakfast Group. They're based out of Seattle, but they do a lot of work up and down the I-5 corridor. They are bringing, I helped them bring what's called the Culture Imperative Program, which is put on by Tony Browder. Those people out there who know who Tony is will be excited about that. But the breakfast group is going to be working in Kent, Renton, and Tukwila, and they're missing a connection with Federal Way, especially in regard to this cultural imperative program. So I encourage the Federal Way Black Collective to connect with the breakfast group on that, and I think you'll find it to be quite beneficial.
Well, I'm excited too, and I just appreciate you all coming in. Mr. Reichtel, we look forward to doing another quarterly meeting soon. Christina, please do not be a stranger. We'd love to have you back. I enjoyed this conversation. None of you be strangers. This is a community conversation. I just want to make sure I reiterate the fact that the reason why we have these conversations every Thursday night is not just to like simply fill a slot. Well, we truly believe that these are conversations our community should be having. Civic engagement is so key to our democracy. I'm not sure what I can really do nationally against 45, but what I can do is engage with Mr. Reichtel, with Dr. Campbell, with like Director Phillips, these are community leaders, elected officials that routinely keep their office doors open. Senator Wilson, she tunes in literally every single week. She comments, asks questions. Like, these people are available. They want to be available. They're looking for ways to connect. And we're just striving to kind of be that conduit to provide a place for you guys to connect with them. So we hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Happy Thursday. Have a wonderful weekend. Don't Zoom too much tomorrow. But we will see you guys next week with Zenobia Harris and the Kent Chamber and another episode of our Racial Equity Toolkit. See you guys next week. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Bye, guys.
James, thanks, Al. Thanks, Christina. See you.
All
See you,
right.
Chris.